We've been working through Jesus' Sermon on the Mount in our Wednesday night Bible studies. And this last week, we were looking at the end of Matthew chapter 6, where Jesus is talking about not to worry, that God's going to provide. And the last verse of this little discourse, it stands out for many people, sometimes for great reasons, sometimes not so great. But it's really been kind of working on me a little bit these last few days. Just wanted to kind of talk about it in particular a little bit. It's Matthew 6:33. It says, "Seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you." And on Wednesday night, I talked about making sure that we're looking for the right things, because sometimes this verse gets misused. But I want to talk a little bit more about the seek first his kingdom and his righteousness. We sometimes get things a little confused and mixed up on which kingdom we're seeking, which kingdom we're trying to build. It's a very natural, normal thing, but we tend to sometimes think that we're doing things for God's kingdom that really aren't for his. We sometimes think that we're building something godly and really we're building something else. We've got to make sure that in everything that we do that God is first. And I can recite, the very common examples that I bring up a bunch, probably because I see people struggle with them the most. In politics, we tend to want to build our political party or our political candidate, and we put those things sometimes on the same level or even above. If our candidate doesn't win, then what are we going to do? And we forget, in particular with politics, that God is the one in charge. The Bible speaks very clearly that God is the one who appoints leaders. And yes, that means sometimes that he will appoint leaders that we don't agree with. God worked through the Roman emperors, some of who were the most corrupt, wicked, psychotic, just nuts in some cases. Caligula was just literally insane. But God worked through him. It doesn't mean that he was godly, but God used him. If you read Daniel, you'll see how God used Nebuchadnezzar, who was an office rocker guy who would do incredibly ungodly things, but God used him in different ways because God appoints our leaders. We get this idea sometimes that if we don't do our thing, if we don't get out and vote, then suddenly God becomes helpless because the wrong person gets in office. And I've had people tell me that. Now, I believe very strongly in voting. I believe very strongly in politics. But I realize that if the person I want to win doesn't win, that doesn't mean that God is suddenly helpless, that God can't do what he wants to do. We get this funny idea that, man, this election is a referendum on God himself, and if we don't win it, then God loses. God doesn't play that kind of game. God already knows who wins. God already has it planned out, and God can work quite fine without our votes entirely. I know that's a crazy thought. Wait, you mean God doesn't need me to vote? No. In fact, here's an even crazier thought. God doesn't need us at all. Now, he wants us. He wants us to follow him. He wants us to obey him. He wants to be able to use us. He wants us to love on him and worship him so he can love us back, because he does love us. But he doesn't need us one bit. Not a bit. So when it comes to American politics, the crazy thing is that God doesn't need us to put in place who he wants to be in office and who he wants to use. And sometimes, yes, he will allow people to come into office who are extremely ungodly and who do ungodly things, but he uses them for his purposes. Now, I know I can start going off into the deep end. You're going to say, so wait, you mean God used Hitler and the Holocaust? Okay, be careful of extremes. That doesn't mean that God won't also allow people to follow the sinful paths that they choose. I believe that when it comes to leaders, many times God gives us what we deserve. Okay, that's a kind of painful statement. Wait, you mean we deserve them? Sometimes, yeah, because we are pursuing so many other things other than what we're supposed to pursue that God will use the leaders as a wake up call. There's some crazy stories, again, going back to the Roman Empire. Do you know that the church thrived spiritually under the greatest persecution? And in fact, in many countries around the world, China's a great example. The church thrives and grows under persecution. We don't like persecution, it's uncomfortable. But the truth is, persecution is not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, at the very beginning of the Sermon on the Mount, in the Beatitudes, Jesus says, "Blessed are those who are persecuted for my sake." Now, don't imagine persecution that isn't, okay? Just because somebody calls you a name, that's not persecution, okay? Especially when we look at other countries where they don't have the freedom of speech, they don't have the freedom to assemble, they don't have the freedom to pray, they don't have the freedom to witness, and if they're caught with the Bible, they go to prison or worse. We have no concept of persecution here, and we like to make things... We've got a persecution complex. Oh my goodness, they said something bad about us. What persecution? Yeah, we don't have any clue what persecution actually is. But we need to seek God's kingdom. We need to stop getting mixed up about what God's kingdom is. I am a firm believer in the Constitution, a firm believer in the Bill of Rights. I was a history major with focuses on political science. I love the Constitution. I know the Constitution. But we get ideas sometimes that our rights are on the same level as the Word. It's not. They're precious. They're wonderful. But we're going to be fine spiritually if we didn't have them. And so when we get this idea that we have to fight for our interpretation of our rights, and we put that over loving people and forgiving people and blessing people, when we start using terms like libtard and snowflake and, idiot, imbecile, and stuff like that, we're not pursuing his kingdom. We're not seeking his righteousness. We're seeking our own interpretation of what we want, and we've put things up on the same level of Scripture as other things, and they shouldn't be there. People are God's kingdom. Are we looking to bless others? Are we seeking to encourage others? Even when, especially when they have different views than us, different political views, different religious views, they look different. That's God's kingdom, to build up others, not tear them down, not rip them apart. And I have to admit, I struggle with this because I get on social media and I look at all the things that people are ridiculous about and dumb about and gullible about, and I want to correct and fix everybody, and I get in that mode sometimes. That's not building his kingdom. That's not seeking his righteousness. That's shoving mine on other people. And I've had to back out of a lot of social media where I've got my auto posts for my channels and stuff, but I'm really not making too many posts, and I'm certainly not reading, especially the Facebook feed where a lot of this stuff is, because I get into that mode where it's like, let me fix and correct and put in the right information and get these people on the right page and make sure that they know what they're really supposed to do, because they're believing all this other hoopla stuff that's just ridiculous, and they're following other people that they shouldn't, and they shouldn't be doing any of those things, okay, because they're building up kingdoms that are not God's. They're building kingdoms of fear and myth and lies in an attempt to steer people where they should go, which is wrong. But me correcting it in a spirit of, I'm right, you're wrong, I know what I'm talking about, you don't, you're not going to be good until you believe the same way I do, that's not any better either. That's also not building his kingdom. And it's hard for me because I want to correct gently but my desire to correct overrules the gentle a lot. So I have to back out. Okay, it's time. I'm not building kingdom. I'm not bearing fruit. I'm not doing anything productive or anything that's going to win anybody over. So time to stop, because it's not going to help anything. It's hard to weigh what we're going to do. And okay, if I say this, is it going to have the effect I want? Or am I just sitting there going, see, I told them, showed them the way it is. Now maybe they'll get their act together. It's building my righteousness, not his. And it's so easy to do because so many are doing it. Which kingdom are we building? Do we think that God's helpless without us? I know, all of us are. No, of course not. But do we think that if we don't make this post, that God can still do what he wants to do? Do we think that if our party doesn't win an election, can God still do what he wants to do? Do we think that if our candidate doesn't win an election, can God still do what he wants to do? Can God speak through a donkey? Sometimes I think some of our presidents we've had are. But God can do what he wants to do. All is not lost if what we want to see accomplished doesn't happen, because God is still going to accomplish what he wants. Follow him. Build his kingdom. Look for what he wants. Pray for other people. Encourage other people. And that's hard for me. My family is growing up. They were not encouragers. They were biters. We teased a lot, but we didn't build up. So it's a very hard thing for me to do. It's easy for me to strike out and correct. It's hard for me to build up, to bless, to encourage, to say good things to people. And I have to be careful, because it's not building his kingdom, it's building mine. It's not seeking his righteousness, it's trying to show off mine. Anytime that we've got to be right. So I encourage you. Think about those things that we do, that we push. Really think about the root of it. While we may say on the surface, oh, no, I know God's in charge. Do we really? Do we really think and feel that and believe it? Because if we did, we probably wouldn't worry so much about some of the things that we do. God's kingdom has lasted for thousands of years without a Bill of Rights. People have got drawn far closer to him without freedom of speech and freedom of religion. Yes, they're good, but sometimes we get so cushioned by them that we begin to hold those up above our actual devotion to God. Seek to protect them, but make sure you're doing it in God's way, in God's fashion, and let God be the one to preserve it. Let God be the one to fight the battles. Make sure that every word that comes out of our mouth proceeds from the mouth of God and from his heart. Because if we're doing it on our own without praying over it first, without knowing it's him speaking and not us, we're trying to do it for him. He doesn't need us to do it for him. He wants us to do it with him. There's a difference there. So again, seek first his kingdom. Analyze what you do. Is it building his kingdom in his way, in his manner? Or is it really ours and we're just trying to justify it? But the amazing thing is, when we seek to build his kingdom, he'll take care of everything. He's going to take care of everything anyways. Are we comfortable with that? Are we comfortable sometimes with letting it go and letting God do it? Thanks so much for watching.